Islam initially had the advantage over the people of India because the Indians were very busy quarreling among themselves when Islam arrived. And also, the Islamic people still used horses, and the people of India, the soldiers of India, were fighting from the backs of elephants. And it was eventually found that horsemen make better fighters than elephant riders. For one thing, the horse is faster. And for another, a person can grip a horse better than he can an elephant. I mean, I've often wondered what it would be like to fight in the back of an elephant when you're pretty high off the ground. If you look down, if you have any fear of heights, you're going to get scared just looking to the ground. Whereas from horseback, you at least have a chance of surviving if you fall. From the back of an elephant, you would have much less of a chance. But anyway, the horse proved to be the better animal to fight with than the elephant. And eventually, the people of India stopped using elephants and started using horses. And when they did a little bit better. But the Islamic people and the Hindu people have been at odds with each other from that day to this. And I can tell you on a personal note, Lockheed used to hire people from these countries to try to encourage them to buy our airplanes, particularly C-130. And one time my department hired a man from India, a Hindu man and a Muslim man, to work in the same department. And initially they did not get along at all. But after a couple of years of being isolated from everybody else, I mean, they were both different from let's face it, they were different from those of us who are American, which most Lockheed employees were. He eventually found they had more in common, and they wound up liking each other. Unfortunately, the Hindu man died of throat cancer, only lived about 50 years. As far as I know, the Muslim man is still there. He eventually became a supervisor, and possibly is still there. But the two sides developed a strong dislike for each other. And your book mentions several things they didn't like. Number one, the Muslims ate beef. Hindus do not. And this is a big issue among Hindus. They insist that beef should not be eaten. Muslims says, okay, now neither side would eat pork. But beef, the Muslims ate in abundance. Hindus do not. Also, Indian artwork appeared to be very vulgar to Muslims. The Muslims insisted that the female anatomy was not for public display. The Hindus believed otherwise, and their artwork again appeared to be very vulgar to the Muslims. There were several other differences your book elaborates on, particularly the treatment of women. A lot of Hindus decided to copy some of the Muslim practices and hide their women, conceal their women, believing this would make them more subservient. And your book says in some ways Muslim women actually were better off than the Hindu women because Muslim women could at least own property and could at least inherit, something Indian women were not allowed to do. The practice of Indian women throwing themselves on a fire and burning themselves to death when their husbands died, the Muslims did not stop this practice, even though at times they protested, but nevertheless they let it go on. The practice was not stopped until later when the British conquered India, and the British insisted that, hey, we think this practice is inhumane, and eventually the rest of the world convinced the people of India that you need to stop this. But for a time, no, what you had was two cultures meeting that had a few things alike. Now, one thing the Muslims did like, and some of them copied, was the Indian belief that the ruler was divine. And a lot of Muslim monarchs said, hey, this is great, we'll consider ourselves divine too, even though Muhammad had not taught it. So some of the Muslim rulers took up the belief that, hey, we're divine. And, drinking, the people of India drank a lot. The Muslims did not believe in it. So Muslim rulers, when they took over, would try to stop the Indian people from drinking. And your book gives a little aside, a little, on page 251, about an Islamic ruler who tried to stop the practice of drinking and finally realized, hey, I might as well compromise. These people are going to do it anyway. So he said, well, you can drink as long as you drink in your own home and don't drink in public. And when we compromised this far, a lot of conspiracies against this government diminished. But the Indian people apparently like to roll dice, engage in games of chance, which is anathema to the Muslims. In other words, now, there were problems. I had a student from India one time insist that when the Muslims came in, they forcibly converted Hindu people to Islam at Sword Point. I did some research on it, and in some cases this was true, and in some cases it isn't. So you can't make a blanket statement. There undoubtedly were, and the people of India will quickly tell you, I mean the Hindu people will quickly tell you, that these people were forcibly converted. In some cases they were, in others they were not. The conflict between India and Pakistan goes on to this very moment. Both sides have developed a nuclear bomb, and the Pakistanis have been accused of going into India and practicing terrorism. Pakistanis being Muslim. And the conflict goes on with seemingly no real end in sight. All right. I'm going to stop right here, and next time we'll take up with Tamerlane. And then go from there to talking more about India's caste system. And then from there, we're going to spend the rest of the chapter talking about Southeast Asia, as best as we know it. We'll finish the chapter next class.